Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session, Tackling Compliance Today. As the legal and regulatory environment is continuously evolving and changing, organizations are still struggling to keep pace with the requirements and also the multitude of costs of compliance. Our panel today will provide insight on what are some of the challenges faced by organizations, how organizations are doing to address these challenges and increase efficiencies. So my name is Adriana Gliga-Belavic. I'm a partner in the cybersecurity and privacy team at MNP, and I will be the moderator today. And with me, I have a distinguished panel, and I would like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves now. So Kat, go ahead.
Thanks, Adriana. My name is Kat Coode, and I started my career in software development and architecture at BlackBerry. And for the last 7 years, I've been running my own data privacy consultancy called Binary Tattoo. And I spend the bulk of my time helping to walk companies through privacy regulation compliance like GDPR and LGPD.
Hi, folks. My name's Chetan Raithapa. I'm with IBM, and I've been with IBM for about 6 years. I was with Deloitte prior to that for about 11 to 12 years, and EDS. I started my career with EDS in the UK. And so over those years, my career's been focused in cybersecurity, risk management, GRC, as a term we may talk about later, and controls management and compliance ultimately. And my role right now within IBM is leading up security within Western Canada for IBM, and specifically within one team called Security Strategy, Risk and Compliance. So look forward to talking with everybody about compliance, and it should be fun.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Blais. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer through Cyberia, which is a research education network, technology accelerator in the province of Alberta. So I'm a shared CISO. I have the opportunity to work with multiple higher learning institutions. You heard in the cats through the hurdles of security and some of the compliance things. I have a really diverse background. I'm a network guy. I'm a security guy. I wrote software. I actually wrote COBOL. Probably tells you how old I am. I don't know if anybody on the panel has written COBOL, but it's been a while. But I really enjoyed the security industry and had the opportunity to actually do governance and compliance work with large financial institutions as well. So looking forward to the chat today.
Well, good afternoon and good morning, depending upon your place in the country. My name is David Craig. Formerly with the cybersecurity and privacy practice at PwC. I retired a little while ago, and immediately after retiring, took on the CISO role at CN Rail. I've been most recently a special advisor on cyber and privacy at BDC, Bank of Canada, and like everyone else, have a very long history with telco, privacy, and have had a chance to work with Adriana when we were both at PwC. So very much looking forward to this afternoon's conversation.
Well, thank you all for that, and let's dive right in. So let's start with the challenges. So we know they all face challenges. What are some of these challenges, both from the security and privacy perspective? And maybe also if we can talk a little bit about what are some of these key compliance programs that CISOs will need to manage and participate in today's environment. So Kat, let's start with you.
All right, so the biggest challenge I see with compliance is, well, there's twofold. It's ever changing. I mean, a lot of these, especially from a privacy perspective, we're getting all sorts of new compliance. So GDPR is only a few years old. LGPD in Brazil just was released. CCPA was released in California in January of this year, and then already CRPA or CPRA is coming to legislation now. So it's ever changing. This isn't something you can come in and do once. And then the other big challenge that I see is that companies have developed services and products without considering compliance. So we are not developing something from scratch where we can make that consideration. We're actually having to go back into existing systems and then update them accordingly with compliance in mind.
Anybody else would like to contribute?
Yeah, I'll chip in there. Just to add to that, to what Kat said, certainly that ever-changing landscape is key, because it's that ever-changing landscape is really applicable to the way organizations are moving to cloud right now. That rate of migration is amazing. It's fast, and that kind of landscape, the way that's changing is it's hard for regulatory bodies to keep up with that. So that's a really important measure. And of course, we'll talk about the solutions and so on later, but that's definitely a key challenge there as well.
Yeah, I'd jump in and just say exactly the same thing. There's just the sheer volume of the compliance kind of items out there make it extremely challenging for organizations if they're not well organized internally. So absolutely.
And my comment would be one of mindset. Compliance, sometimes gets positioned as something you have to do, that an external regulator or some external force is forcing the organization to do it, as opposed to that mindset of, hey, this is something that we need to do, to create business value or to improve, the customer or employee experience. And it's that mindset that kind of drives, if you have to brush your teeth every day, it's a little bit different than wanting to brush your teeth every day.
And that's a very good introduction to our next subject there. So who should drive compliance in an organization? So, as Dave was saying, is it just compliance that we should be worried about, or is there more than that? So who needs to drive it, but also who needs to participate and provide support in these programs for them to be successful? Curtis, would you like to start?
Sure. I would say that the ones that I've been involved with that are most successful are when, of course, the executive are behind it. So if there's no executive buy-in in these things, then clearly there's no will to provide, the time and resources required to help get them done. And it sort of ties in with David's last comment about, kind of the mindset. Do they feel like it's something we need to do and we should do, and it benefits our customers and it's good for the organization? Or is it, it's just one of those peskies, kind of like the mosquito thing that you just want to swat it and get rid of it. So definitely executive have to be a part of it. And then as far as who needs to be a part of it, I would say, I think we were kind of talking about how, a CISO should be a part of it. I always try and work my way into the architecture of an organization as a CISO. And the reason I do that is because if I have some say or a little control at the architecture level, I can help with meeting some of the compliance requirements, because a lot of them are based on how you architect things and how you build them from the beginning. So,
Kat, I want you to maybe tell us a little bit about what are some of the challenges that privacy organization has in this, and from what you have seen.
I think one of the big things that's happening right now is people didn't care about compliance. Certainly in Canada, we've had PIPEDA for years and no one's actually cared to be compliant with PIPEDA. So there's all sorts of things in there about the ability to request your data and correct your data that people didn't even know was something they had to support. So that's been a problem here. What's happening is companies, either because their customers are requesting it or because they have clients that are requesting it, are trying to rush through compliance. So that's a big problem I see. And in terms of who needs to be involved, certainly, like Curtis said, like you need buy-in from the top down for sure. But you also need all the way to the bottom. Like every employee needs to be trained on compliance to understand what their role is. How do they communicate if they're customer facing employees to people who contact them about the company, but even whoever's defining, like whether it's your product manager, whatever the title is in your company, whoever's defining your service or product needs to have privacy and security at the forefront before they design something. So if your product manager is coming in and saying, it'd be really cool is to put a biometric in here in order to use this for login. Yeah, that would be really cool, but it's also a huge privacy concern. So having every level of your business understand what it means to be compliant and how to integrate privacy and security into the creation of the product certainly would make a big difference down the line. So, and education, again, education. We talk about that in cybersecurity all the time with phishing and everything, but there needs to be, from the top all the way down to the bottom, everyone needs to be aware of what their role is.
Okay, so let's move on then. Maybe talk a little bit about now that we think about having a compliance program and we talked about who should be involved in, why do we need to ensure that there are efficiencies in this compliance program? And you all talked about there are a multitude of compliance requirements. So obviously organizations are really quite swamped on having all these audits going on all the time. So if we want to maybe have a little bit of conversation on why it's important to ensure efficiencies. Chetan, would you like to start us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's firstly, I'll say, in terms of the title where we say ensuring efficiency, if you speak to an auditor, they will always kind of sway us away from the word ensure. So, the reality is, can we ever ensure efficiencies in compliance? I mean, that's going to be a tough one. But so, I'll kind of put my auditor hat on and sway away from that. But in terms of the why, certainly, of course, cost, because if you think about the executive perspective, they're always going to say, what is the cost of us to ensure compliance? And so that is always going to be a major issue and a concern. So managing cost and bringing that down is going to be key. And so that's a key reason for why we need to gain efficiencies through that. The second aspect I'll just add to that is, coming back to that initial point that I made about the speed of change of various aspects, change in regulations, change in technology, change in process, change in organizational structure, M&As and those kind of things. So that speed of compliance and the rate at which that's changing means we have to be efficient and we have to be able to keep up. And if we can't, we're always going to be kind of scraping at it and finding a way to keep up with it. And ultimately, we're going to get hit with some sort of breach of stuff or something to that matter. So those are the key reasons for me.
Okay, anybody else?
And I guess just building on that, from an employee perspective, is just reducing fatigue. We've all talked about the number of simultaneous programs that are underway, and you think of, each one will have a program, each one will have a series of questions or a questionnaire or, some type of data to fill out. And for those of you and us that have been involved with PCI, for example, filling out all the requirements for PCI, filling out all the requirements for, even some of the privacy questions for CASL, a variety of, and so, without some efficiency where you're able to maybe, ask once and use the control or use that information for many different programs, I think that's one of the key elements that organizations need to drive towards. And as Chetan said, clearly we'll talk about some tools here shortly. But certainly, I think this is where the organization needs to have kind of that inventory of compliance programs and really do itself a favor to understand where it may be able to economize and use the output of one to fill in the data for the other.
I'd love to jump on that, David. It's hard to have this conversation without talking about IT governance, in my mind, because in a couple of times I've been successful in having some efficiencies gained, is when, and it almost leans back to a second thing you said, David, where it was about mindset. It's about, okay, if we actually on our own sort of focus on IT governance as an organization and really do a good job of that, I found that there's a lot of overlap. I haven't looked recently, but the last few times I looked at maybe some sort of compliance requirement that came in over top of like the IT governance structure in an organization. And there's like 80% or 90% overlap, which gets to those efficiencies that I think you were referring to. So, and then adding the mindset component you mentioned earlier, if you were focusing heavily on IT governance and did it well, I think automatically you gain immediate efficiencies, and then you add those components that you identify that are gaps from the ones that come in. So.
Yeah, and I think another point with efficiency too is I'm very much about, from a privacy perspective, the foundation and privacy by design. But you look at your house, your foundation is the most important part of your home, and you wouldn't be able to build more floors on your home without that foundation. But never will you invite someone over and be like, oh, cool, check out my foundation. It's really great. Nobody wants to see it. It's not the fun part of what you do. But again, it is a poor foundation means everything would crumble, and a good foundation means you can continue continue to add on. So it's hard, again, with companies with existing products, services, people have been in business 40, 60 years, but going back and creating a foundation of privacy and security will create efficiency moving forward because you'll already have that in place. So instead of how do we encrypt this thing on transfer that's never been encrypted in storage, let's go back and say, let's just encrypt it from the get-go. And it's going to take time. We're going to have to tear this piece out and redesign it. But if it's encrypted from the bottom, then we don't have to worry about adding special tools and policies in order to handle it once it gets to the top. So unfortunately, again, like it costs money, but it will cost less money now to redo that foundation than it will later. And every time, like ISO 27701, which was just released, which is the privacy piece of ISO, very GDPR-like. Again, if you had the right foundation in there and you'd already set that stuff up, you could be just checking through that checklist for those new compliances that are being released.
And you all mentioned during this conversation a lot of different requirements. So, we mentioned PCI, we mentioned privacy. So there are all these different frameworks that are out there. So are there any frameworks that could be used to address this multitude of things that we need to comply with if we are to get to efficiencies? And how do we measure that we actually get to efficiency?
Yeah, I can jump in there for sure. I mean, so absolutely. I mean, measuring the efficiencies is critical to your point, Adriana. In terms of the frameworks, unfortunately, there are a few frameworks out there. I mean, if there was one framework, that would be perfect. So everybody can align to that. So it's key for an organization to say, hey, this is going to be my hybrid of frameworks. That's going to be our internal framework that we are finalizing and applicable to our organization. That's key. But in terms of frameworks that we can leverage, there are, for example, Unified Compliance Framework, UCF. That's a facility that allows you to take regulations, standards, policies from various other sources, and as a point of reference, combine that into one, and you can use that. That's great. There's, of course, as part of the ISO 27000 series, Kat, you mentioned there. Of course, you can leverage that. NIST CSF, NIST Cybersecurity Framework. So that allows you to point to various other sources and bring it into one framework. I'll just say one more, the Cloud Security Alliance, CSA. That's especially as organizations move and migrate to the cloud. CSA is, for me, a great framework to leverage as well.
And go ahead, sorry, Curtis.
Thanks, David. I'm just going to add to that. I think if you look at, I never was a COBIT fan before. As an IT guy, as a network guy, I kind of laughed when people would bring COBIT to me, and I'd see the auditors around. That was early in my career. But as I started being involved more at the governance level, I realized that a framework like COBIT, which I would consider the sort of the only framework of its kind like it, because you can try and map a privacy or a security framework to it, and it doesn't, and it's different. What I realized was that it kind of describes the what you should be doing. So if I stuck that as a layer above and said, okay, if we're doing IT governance and we're going to follow COBIT 5, it's giving me the what, the how, which is the other frameworks we've been talking about, the ISOs. If I want to, how do I do security? Well, I can plug in ISO or NIST. How do I do privacy? I can plug in, some of the privacy legislations. How do I do service desk? Well, I can use ITIL. And so what it does is it helps to organize those things. And again, I'll go back and say, if we're trying to gain some sort of efficiency here, following a framework like COBIT, which gives me the what, and then plugging in underneath what makes sense to my organization, the hows in the various areas, I've seen significant success doing things like that.
And Curtis, just building on that, I would say that Koso and the Koso Enterprise Risk Management Framework tries to, be that umbrella framework that because COBIT unfortunately has been, a bit focused on IT, and so, as people try to say, well, we need something that's broader than IT, and we need some discussion on business process. But, I teach IT governance at one of the universities, and your point is extremely well taken in terms of whether it's Koso or COBIT. It is one of those large frameworks that does allow you, to incorporate some of the other activities that we're talking about. The challenge is that, does it fit the organization? my assumption is that most of us will focus on medium to large organizations, but if you get into a smaller operation, frameworks like Koso, frameworks even like 27001 and the NIST cybersecurity framework, don't really fit either. So I think that the other thing is, the framework needs to be fit for purpose for the size of the organization and the strength of the people that can drive it.
No, all great points. And what I heard from you all also was the involvement of risk management. So what should be the involvement of risk management within compliance?
So I actually see, my view is, if an organization has a handle on risk management, and when I say risk management, I mean enterprise risk management and an IT risk management, and then some people are going to refer to cybersecurity risk management, but that could be a subpart to that. But if organizations have a handle on that, my view is they've got a strong handle on compliance, because compliance is a subset, for me, a subset of risk management. And if you've got a handle on your risks, you've got to handle your compliance. And so what role does that play, Adriana, to your point? It's pivotal, absolutely critical. So if you've got a CRO in the organization, or your CISO is responsible for risk management from a security standpoint, and the IT organization has accountability, whoever those folks are, CIO, CHRO, CFO, absolutely critical.
Oh, that's right. So let's move towards increasing efficiency. Is there a role for automation? What tools can we use to actually move towards increased efficiencies? What have you used, or what have you seen in other organizations? If you can share a little bit about that.
So I'll start, Adriana. And I still think the most commonly used tool for any form of compliance work is Excel. And so as much as we want to talk about the GRC suites, and IBM has a good one. There's a variety of others out there. It still is Excel and spreadsheets, and maybe a macro or two embedded in a spreadsheet tends to be the tool of choice. And so again, it goes to if you're looking for a shiny silver bullet to solve a compliance issue, I think you have the program backwards. And for those of us that have been in consulting for a while, we know that the process work that is so fundamental to getting this right is always the last to happen. It's kind of like, oh, well, we'll get the shiny new tool and we'll either force fit the tool to the process, or we'll say, well, now that we have this shiny new thing, we'll have to do some work on the process. And of course, I won't forget the people side. We won't educate them. We won't train them. We'll do it the old-fashioned way. We'll just take away whatever they were using, and so they have to conform to this new process. So, I think with the use of the cloud, some of the advancements in data analytics, I think the tools or tool sets are becoming much better, much more impactful. I think the business case will be easier to justify some of the investments in these tools, especially on a per user basis. But the organizations that approach it with a tool first philosophy, I think are just going to end up, and I know this is cliche, but paving the goat path.
Yeah, I totally agree with David. I have to say, from a privacy perspective, it's been great because recently we've seen a lot of amazing new tools that have been released. There's data discovery tools, there's consent management, like all these free cookie banners that are popping up. It's fantastic. A little bit of a big pet peeve of mine are the tools that have that big disclaimer that says you're one-stop shop for compliance. That doesn't exist. So I just want to start there. There is no one tool. And I think that's kind of part of the problem, is that, especially from a CISO perspective, where do you start and how many tools do you need and how many and where do they overlap and what do they do? But the thing that David said that I really want to touch on too from a consulting perspective is the tool will help, but the tool isn't solving the entire problem. So a lot of what I do is privacy impact assessments or data protection impact assessments. The benefit of running that assessment is the threat risk analysis inside that assessment that is specific to your product or service or how your company runs. And you can download tools and templates up the wazoo, but none of them are going to review your product or your service and tell you where those threats are and how to mitigate them and where the controls are to mitigate them. So it's a great guidance. Tools have been amazing to guide you through compliance. That's great, but you can't just checkbox a bunch of things and consider yourself done, or you're not really mitigating those risks that everyone has been touching on.
Yeah, on panels, it's more fun when you get a couple who disagree and you can have some really good, hard back and forth. But it's hard to disagree with what's going on. I want to add this. In my experience, if I came in with a tool, and I've done it twice, or been involved with it twice, I was the one who brought it in, but I was involved in them twice, and where somebody came straight out of the gate with a tool, expensive, and they spend a lot of money. In both of those instances, they failed miserably. And what I noted, where I found the most success was, back to as David and Kat sort of mentioned, the spreadsheet. And I think I was trying to figure out why that was. And what I came to was there's kind of a culture shift that has to kind of happen in an organization. And it's really easy to take a spreadsheet and walk them through and they it's sort of like their eyes open up a little and go, okay, this maybe not so bad. And it's simple to walk through. And then they get the idea of what it means to be a risk-based decision-making organization. And then from there, you have a much better chance of success of bringing in a tool and potentially, okay, let's make it a little easier for you. And then, or maybe let's leverage the tool to actually assess our vendors against some of these things. So we know we're not, in a situation there. So, I wish I could disagree, but I can't. So sorry.
Well, I will add one thing, actually, because it happened to me quite recently. So I'm working with a very large financial institution. And as we are going through what is a PCI assessment of all things, of a new product, what we run into, the challenge was, how do we collect all this information that we need to do the assessment? Even that if we have a spreadsheet, let's say with the framework, getting all the information together, which could be hundreds of documents, it becomes such a challenge for organizations. So even that, in some cases, you think it's difficult to just have a tool. I agree, you have to start with what issue you want to solve first, but it could be very beneficial to organizations if they have a large, complex organization where they need to collect this information for multiple things during the year, so to have a centralized way of dealing with it. And Chetan, I think you are going to add something as well.
No, thanks, Adriana. Yeah, I appreciate that. I was trying to simplify it in my head, and I see as three kind of key buckets, which is that the documentation for compliance, and Excel, couldn't agree more with everybody. Excel, fantastic place to start, and definitely the right place, because understand your process, understand what you need to comply to, put it in somewhere, and Excel is fantastic. That's the first bucket. The second is enforcing compliance, and then the third is to monitor compliance. And so my suggestion would definitely be to anybody, which is, you already have a whole bunch of tools in your organization that enable you towards compliance. And so first understand what those tools are, their purpose in this compliance world, put those into those buckets. It doesn't have to be those three buckets, but something to that effect. And then, go forth and implement your strategy for compliance, because it's not just about having a view on it and using what the tools, and to the points that have been made around these huge, expensive, often GRC solutions. It's about leveraging what you have already and then thinking about what you need to purchase.
So we all talked about, yes, the tools are expensive. Compliance is still seen as a cost. So what are some of your experience in building a business case for investment in the organizations on dealing with compliance and increasing efficiencies?
Well, Adrian, I'll start. I think it really does come down to a financial measure. Normally there's some net present value because the sponsor of the GRC program is up against the product manager, is up against the customer service manager, is up against the the folks running other functional units within the organization, and kind of everyone goes to the CFO with their story of how the deployment of this capability is going to produce a net positive benefit for the organization from a dollar and cents perspective. And so I do think that there is a financial measure that's part of that business case. In some industries, it's a little easier to justify the expenditure because there may be some external regulatory compliant. My experience is that it's easier to get GRC deployed in a bank than it is in a retail operation. And then the kind of that third element that that Chetan mentioned is really, he mentioned enforcement, but I wanted to say engagement, in the sense of how do you get the people involved, and is there a way of building employee or customer engagement in some aspects, supplier engagement, how does that get worked into the business case? And so it's a tall order. As I said, I do think it's getting easier now that maybe you're dealing with a bit of a cost per user capability versus what we used to have to do in the past with big iron and lots of on-prem applications. So I think it's getting easier, but I still think the business case is going to be a dollar and cents one, and that's where the sponsor needs to be able to make sure that she can actually talk to dollars and cents, the compliance aspect, and then how employees are going to be engaged in it.
That's great, David. Anybody else? Like we talked a little bit about how do you build the compliance programs, and talking about risk and value to the organization, and okay, GRC tools are expensive, but I found that in some smaller organizations, because they are the lack of resources, sometimes they do need some help. They do need to employ some tools to help them. So any other areas where you found that there was a need for investment in organizations, and how that organization dealt with it successfully?
I'm going to just quickly jump in. Maybe this is the point where we have a little bit of a difference of opinion. I'm going to ask the panelists, maybe, is anybody here do a business case to buy insurance for their car? And the answer is probably no. We don't like it. None of us like it. We all hate having to pay for insurance because we never need it. Or we do, or it seems like we never need it. But when we do need it, it's like, oh, thank goodness I have it. And I have my feeling about this is, if I have to produce now I know there's a cost. There's always a cost to compliance, right? If you're not doing already good governance, which should be built into what your costs of your business now, and you're starting from ground zero, there's a cost, obviously, because there's people and time and resource that you're going to have to put towards this. But so there's going back to our efficiencies, if you have good IT governance from the outset, and let's say you're starting from nowhere, start from good IT governance. Two, if you have to do a business case to say we should be compliant with things that our industry makes us be compliant with, I think there's a bigger problem in the organization. And this again goes back to, executive sponsorship, recognizing that this is important, and we have to do this to survive, essentially.
But I think, Curtis, my point was that it was the business case for automation. So I would agree, in the sense of, certainly, there's no way you could talk the CEO of a bank out of not being FACTA compliant. But there could be a couple different ways in which the organization becomes FACTA compliant, and all of those alternatives take money. And so it's a matter of, okay, so do we do it manually? Do we do it semi-manually? Do we do it fully automated? So it was just more of, you know, and I think as cybersecurity professionals, I think we all get to fall on, well, there is no cybersecurity legislation in the same way that there is PIPEDA and GDPR and you know, the myriad of state legislative requirements for privacy in the U.S. But you know, unless you're doing work in China, the last time I looked, there's very few cybersecurity laws, but we are all trying to be, you know, more cybersecurity compliant with respect to NIST or ISO 27000, etc.
I think if we kind of look at compliance like IKEA furniture, when you buy IKEA furniture, half the people use the instructions and half the people don't. If there was a charge for the instructions, I think even less people would buy the instructions, and you'd have a whole lot of people whose dinner tables were falling apart. So that's kind of the way compliance feels to me, right? Like half the people are like, you know what, I'm going to follow this prescribed set of instructions. And Curtis had alluded to that earlier. It's not intended as just to be some pain in the butt list that you have to fill out and pay money for. This is really intended as an instructional walkthrough of how to secure your company. So, but now we're asking companies to essentially pay money and have auditors in and have all this stuff looked at. Not everyone is going to want to pay money for that. And most people are going to go, I think I'm just going to build this table and whatever happens, happens. I think the fact that though we're dealing with, from a privacy perspective, we can't get that back. I mean, even from security, more often than not, once you're breached, you're breached. But the privacy is the toothpaste in the tube. Like once that information is out there, you cannot get that back. So you can't just say, hey, we got breached, but don't worry, we mitigated it and we stopped it. Once the privacy information is leaked, it's reputational damage. It's all sorts of other problems that are coming from that. So it is a fundamental problem asking companies to spend money on, again, a set of instructions or certifications, unless there is a reverse, unless there's a financial need to do so. So the privacy regulations with their fines have started to do a good job of kind of instigating this and getting people to do it. But yeah, in cybersecurity, as everyone has said, there has to be a financial reason to invest the money because companies don't see a reason to buy the instructions.
Yeah, and I think all of us probably had to deal at some point with requests such as, tell me the minimum I can do to pass the compliance. And as we all know, passing compliance doesn't always mean that you are going to be, securing the most important information that you have. What maybe I'm just getting some questions from the audience here is what is your opinion on how much you should share with the organization in terms of compliance? Like how do you measure, because I've seen this happening between business units as well, when you start putting measurements around how compliant is one business unit versus the other. Is there a role on figuring out how to get them incented to move towards compliance?
That's a really interesting question. I think, and my view is, unless there's any confidential or sensitive information as part of that data that's been, analyzed from a compliance standpoint, and it's company-wide available information, then I'd say transparency is good. In the sense that the person who's the custodian of that process and coordinating the compliance exercises, for them to share that information in a filtered way, of course, not just kind of bombarding people with information, but for them to filter people information to the right, to the key people in the organization, I think is a good thing. And also the other thing that struck to my mind about that was, we've kind of come across this term gamification, and there's various aspects when we're doing new learning exercising and training exercises, a lot of folks are bringing in this gamification aspect. And if you introduce that to compliance, which I haven't seen too often, but if you introduce that to compliance, it actually brings an edge of competitiveness to individuals and teams within the organization. And so that's, I think that would be a great way to introduce that into bringing that data to the right people in the right way to almost trigger that competitiveness to say, hey, I can be more compliant than you, kind of thing, which some people would probably see through it, but I think it's worth trying.
Okay, anybody else wants to?
Yeah, no, I think it's always a challenge in terms of reporting. How detailed do you make the reporting? Can you use the traditional red, yellow, green type charts? May be able to give a direction, but may not be certain. But to Kat's point, it's just think how devastating it would be if one of the business units reported the status of their privacy program as red. You immediately would jump to the conclusion that that business unit is abusing either the privacy data or the personal data of its employees or its customers. And so, again, you have to be careful with those types of programs, that type of that type of reporting. I think it's necessary to be able to drive change, but I think you also need to be sensitive to the way that the employee, that the customer, that a regulator, that the prosecuting attorney is going to view your internal reporting on the matter.
All great points. And just the other day, I had a conversation with somebody who was on a board and said, I'm getting all this information all the time, and I have no idea what it means. So how do you report what your security or privacy program or your compliance with different programs it's achieved, or how the money spent are actually driving you towards more compliance? It's also very important these days, because the boards are starting to understand that they do have accountability for these programs, and unfortunately, more times than not, they get reports that don't make any sense to them. So let's just talk a little bit about automation and AI. And the role of machine learning, AI. We talk about all these technologies coming on board, but how can they be used maybe for compliance, and how can we optimize the collection and optimization and going through large volumes of data using some of these technologies? So the way I see that from an AI standpoint, of course, it's key, and I think we have to just be able to harness AI for what it is right now, and without getting too carried away with it. It all comes back to, we have to ensure our process and our data is accurate, and if that process and data is accurate, then we can leverage AI to improve those efficiencies. Without the accuracy of data, without the process in place, AI, which in effect, when we think about its machine learning, it's going to be learning the wrong practices and the wrong processes and off the wrong data. And so that foundation, and I think you made that point about foundation being key. And so that foundation is absolutely critical. And then some of these bigger GRC platforms are already leveraging AI. They're already bringing that into their tools. So of course, AI comes at a cost. There are some specific smaller tools that you can leverage from an AI standpoint. But I certainly see a lot of value if we can harness it more and more as months and years go by. I see a lot of value in AI and to bring efficiencies, especially for things such as looking out for the changes in regulations. That is going to be great and useful. Looking out for changes in your landscape and preempting, more importantly, that kind of predictive preemption kind of thing, to be able to preempt where there's going to be changes from a compliance standpoint, from a process, a team standpoint, and a technology perspective, of course. So I definitely see a lot of value. I'm not going to go into which specific technologies or vendors, because there are a lot, but certainly, it does play a role, but we have to temper expectations on that, is my view.
Okay. I had mentioned before, I think data discovery tools is a great use of AI, and the ability to, I've seen some great tools out there, where you could show it what your pay stubs scan all your systems that are attached to look for anything that resembles your pay stub and pull that out of all sorts of machines. So, I mean, we always talk about in cybersecurity the crown jewels, or you have to identify your crown jewels. So having a tool that might be able to locate them on machines where you don't know that they're stored is certainly an asset. But as Chetan mentioned, the algorithmic bias behind some of the AI is also a disaster. So it's a double-edged sword. I agree. Like there's tools, if you know that the tool works properly and it's proven. I've seen some amazing tools out there that will conjoin data sets in a way that preserves privacy and anonymity, and then you can, build on your data and process data without compromising individual personal data, which is amazing. And I've even seen some synthetic data creators where it will take large sets of data and create completely synthetic data. So you're not using any of your customers' data, but you could still do all your data processing and analysis on that data. So that's a great way of preserving, again, the privacy of your customers and clients. But yeah, you have to ensure that that tool is proven. Otherwise, it's garbage, I guess. It's garbage data.
I certainly would agree. I think it's a little bit early. I think AI has a lot of promise down the road for things in the compliance space. I had an auditor friend who said, Kurt, if you want to pass an audit, you only have to do, he called it the 3 Ds. He said, document what you do what you documented, and then demonstrate you've done what you documented and you've done what you're going to do. Gee, that was a lot more than 3 Ds. Sorry. So it's document, do, and demonstrate. And as I was thinking about AI, I think what's cool about AI is it could potentially, fit in between some of those. So did I just do what I documented I was going to do and validate that I'm doing those things, or maybe even automatically grab, that evidence I need and put it in a place where it's going to be useful or potentially easier to find. So, or even, as Kat just mentioned, we're seeing DLP tools. Actually, that's, basically what DLP tools are doing right now is sort of that first foray into AI. Are people emailing out, SIN numbers, and are you seeing things like that happen? So I think it's just early days, but stay tuned. I'm sure it's going to get better.
It's coming. So, I wanted to kind of bring us back. Maybe also Dave mentioned that maybe some industries have a easier time in getting the support they need for compliance. Like, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about what have you seen in some of the industries you work with? Doesn't matter how much support you get based on the industry that you work with.
Well, I'll start, Adriana, in the sense of, I guess, the two of us have worked on a number of different mining operations, and generally getting mining companies to spend any time on privacy or cybersecurity, especially when resource prices are low, is almost next to impossible. To Kat's point, they would almost say, well, if there's no fine involved in breaching employee privacy, well, then we'll take that chance. So, linking a cybersecurity program or a privacy program to health and safety, because every mine needs to adhere to health and safety regulations, or, no one really wants to, oversee, a mine that causes, injury or death to its staff. So sometimes in some industries, you may need to link compliance programs to be able to win that adoption. I think in the financial industry, as we'd mentioned before, it's probably pretty easy just because of the number of regulators and oversight and attention that's paid to it. But and even healthcare, where they understand the importance of privacy, they understand the value of data in a cybersecurity program. But when you have $1 to spend, putting that towards patient care is always easier than putting it towards a privacy or a cybersecurity solution. So yeah, my view is that the industry that you're supporting makes a huge difference in whether or not you can drive a compliance program, or whether it's Atlas pushing the rock uphill.
And since we are talking, about the industries and the fact that, we've been for the last 9 months going through this pandemic, which have impacted a lot of industries. Obviously, a lot of compliance programs probably have been put on hold to deal with more more urgent nature requests, such as keeping the lights on and moving towards the next way of doing business, or next model of doing business and reaching customers. So any other experiences that you might have had with other industries?
So I'll just say I completely agree with the way David put it. Phrasing, tying compliance ultimately to health and safety is a great way of thinking about it. And a lot of people, when they think about cybersecurity, they say, well, hey, if I just think of cybersecurity as safety and ensuring safety, it's probably the right way of doing things. So outside the financial world, and definitely, finance and healthcare being the key to the industries where you're going to see a lot more uptake in compliance programs and risk management programs and associated tools. Every industry is key. I mean, every industry needs to have some element of compliance, be that because of regulatory reasons, legal, or internal mandates as part of their executive mandates. And so, I'll give one example, energy and utilities, not necessarily mining in this case, but specific to utilities and electricity. And so, there's NERC-CIP. And here, so I'm based in Calgary, in Canada. And so Alberta has their own specific requirements to NERC-CIP, ARS. And so those are key, and those need to be understood, not from a federal standpoint, but a provincial standpoint. So, you need to align compliance requirements certainly to your industry, but also to your location, your geography.
The industry I find is the hardest sell is tech, because we've been so pre-programmed for the last 2 decades to put innovation first. How quickly can we get this product out? And especially with apps, people are like, well, I have to get this new feature in, or I've got to go back and stick in something for security and privacy. I just need to get the new feature in because I promised it by next week. And so that attitude of innovate and fail fast in tech, I find, has been really detrimental from a compliance perspective. And I'm seeing a lot of tech firms that have gone from startups to scale-ups, and now those scale-ups are coming back and saying, oh, we don't have anything in terms of security and privacy, and we better put something in now. But again, it would have been easier and less costly to have put it in at the onset of creating what they were creating.
I'll just add that my observation is that the organizations that are under a number of different compliance requirements are clearly get it, because they get it from all different sides. And I think you see them, trying to put them together so that it makes it a little easier to make them happen. But if you're subject to a bunch of different compliance requirements, it just seems to me like they're more aware of it and willing to say, okay, well, it's part of doing business, and we have to figure out how to make it work, and let's make it efficient in how we do it. And then, as has been mentioned, the ones that don't, typically just don't. They try and ignore it or say, nah, we probably don't need to. It might be worth adding, psychologists, or is it sociologists, that tell us that there's the antecedent and the consequence, right? And so the antecedent is you must do this. And if you only have an antecedent, you get about 20% compliance. But if you have a compliance there's something that happens, something bad that happens because you don't comply, you get about 80% compliance. So I don't know if that's a thing that means that every different compliance item that comes out now is going to have some sort of consequence to an organization. If it does, it's going to get very interesting the more that come out.
Well, and I just to finish this question in terms of, I look at the public sector. Some of the public sector, the province and federal government that I've worked with, they have wonderful programs, but they have no penalties for non-compliance. So it's kind of, the number of times we were engaged to do threat risk assessments that, were wonderful documents, to provide them back and to say, well, great, now we know what to fix, but we have no money to fix them.
All great points. And as I was looking to how the organization might have changed their operations since COVID, a lot of organizations have gone to the cloud really quickly. They are working with a lot of third parties. So one of the challenges or changes to compliance programs is how do they monitor their compliance of these third parties, third parties, fourth parties. Do you know where your information is today and who is doing what to it? Because if we look at a lot of the large breaches that happened in the last little while, some of them were just because nobody was monitoring what was in those contracts with those third parties. So there are additional complexities and additional ways of looking at compliance. So I think, Curtis, you mentioned monitoring compliance. So it's not just what you have under your own umbrella and you can see, but also what are those that you don't see once you wrote that contract. So this was a great conversation. And as we come towards the end, if there was one thing that you will advise an executive of an organization, what they should start doing today to address efficiency and compliance, what would that be? Who would like to start?
I could start. So from a privacy perspective, you should definitely be assigning some kind of chief privacy officer, data privacy officer. I don't care what the title is. The GDPR data protection officer is actually its own role, which is a whole other story. But there should be somebody in your company assigned for privacy because, again, the regulations are daunting and someone should be monitoring them as they move forward.
I'll go next. I would say continue to focus on communicating business value. The compliance program, needs to be able to drive business value. I know it's a second item here, Adriana, as we get close, but compliant does not equal secure. And I think that was one of the things, even to Kat's point, it does not equal secure or private. So just because you run a successful compliance program doesn't mean that bad things can't happen.
Okay, Curtis?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry.
That's so good. So I would say this, Simon Sinek just came out with a book called The Infinite Game. And as I was reading the book, I realized something interesting about information security and compliance and the like. And he defines the difference between an infinite game and a finite game. So a finite game would be something like a hockey game. In a hockey game, you know how long it goes, you know who your opponent is. It's relatively easy to determine who's won at the end of the game. And you play a finite game very differently than you play an infinite game. Security, compliance is an infinite game. You have no idea who your opponent is. There's no way to say for sure that you've won. And we can't tell that the game is over. So instead of turning this into a checklist thing that I have to do, we have to change our mindset and remember that compliance security is an infinite game. It has to be baked into what we do, and it has to be something that we deliver as part of who we are and in our context.
I'll stick on that mindset theme. I agree with Curtis that it certainly is a mindset aspect, and in that sense, the one thing I would say is for executives and management is seeing compliance as part and parcel of your risk management exercise. And if you see it that way, and if you just have and improve your risk management program, your framework, and everything underneath that, compliance will come part and parcel of it. And in relation to that, when we talked about the business cases and so on, it's just to quantify it. So, everybody who's the custodian of it and needs to justify it in the organization, quantify the risk and highlight that quantification to the people that the executives and so on, so they understand, what's going to hit them if there's a compliance issue. Right.
And with that, I just wanted to thank our panelists for this great conversation and insightful conversation that they brought to us today, and would like to thank you for joining us today, and all the best for the next 3 days.
Thank you very much.
Bye now.
Thanks everybody. Thank you.
Yeah.